The morning the school never opened again began like any other. There was frost on the window, thin and delicate, tracing silver veins across the glass. I remember pressing my fingertip against it and watching the pattern disappear beneath my warmth. It felt like a small act of power, as if I could erase the cold. My mother was already awake. I could hear the quiet rhythm of her movements in the kitchen. The kettle lid rattling gently. The scrape of a chair. The world felt ordinary. Outside, the sky was pale and undecided, caught between night and morning. I dressed quickly. The classroom would be cold at first, but the iron stove near the blackboard usually warmed the front rows by mid-morning. I liked sitting near the window anyway, even if it meant keeping my coat on longer than the others. My satchel was lighter than it used to be. Fewer books. Paper had grown scarce. Still, I stepped out the door with the same routine. The same path. The same quiet hope that the day would be uneventful. The road to school curved past the bakery, though there had been no bread there for weeks. It passed the church with its cracked bell. It passed houses that seemed to hold their breath each time soldiers marched through town. But that morning, the road was empty. Too empty. No other children ran ahead of me. No laughter echoed between the buildings. No hurried footsteps kicking loose gravel. I slowed my pace. At the corner near the well, I finally saw someone. Anna stood there, clutching her scarf tightly around her neck. She wasn't moving. "Are you late?" I asked. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she pointed. The school building stood at the end of the lane. Wooden, 2 stories, windows tall and narrow. The doors were closed. Not just closed, chained. A thin metal chain looped around the handles, secured with a small lock that caught the weak morning light. We walked closer without speaking. More children gathered slowly behind us. No one dared touch the door at first. There was a piece of paper nailed beside it. The wind had already begun tearing at the edges. I stepped forward and read it aloud because no one else would. Due to circumstances beyond our control, the school will remain closed until further notice. No date, no explanation. Just that, someone laughed nervously behind me. Until further notice, they repeated, as if the phrase itself was a joke. But it didn't feel temporary. It felt final. Our teacher, Miss Adler, was nowhere in sight. Her bicycle, usually leaning against the side wall, was gone. The windows were dark. The stovepipe on the roof gave no smoke. A boy from the older class tried the chain anyway. It rattled sharply against the wood. The sound echoed down the empty lane. It sounded wrong, as if we were disturbing something already settled. One by one, parents began arriving. Not hurried, not panicked, just quiet. They read the paper. They nodded slowly. Some placed a hand on their child's shoulder. Others avoided looking at the door entirely. No one argued. No one demanded answers. It was as if the decision had been expected. Only we had not known. I looked at the windows where I used to sit. I imagined my desk still there. My name carved lightly into the wood beneath it. The small crack in the glass near the corner. The chalk dust that never fully left the air. It all felt close enough to reach, but unreachable. "Go home," my mother said softly when she arrived. I didn't move. "When will it open again?" I asked. She did not respond. Instead, she took my satchel from my shoulder. That small gesture told me more than words could. The days that followed were strangely quiet. Without school, mornings stretched endlessly. The rhythm of lessons, recitations, and bells disappeared. Time became shapeless. At first, some of us gathered anyway. We met near the building. We sat on the steps. We talked about homework we no longer had, but soldiers began patrolling the main road more often, and eventually even gathering there felt dangerous. Rumors spread. The building would be used for storage. No for housing officers. No, it would remain empty. Miss Adler had left town. Miss Adler had been taken for questioning. Miss Adler had family in the East. Every version felt possible. Weeks passed. The chain never moved. One afternoon, I saw two men carry crates inside. The chain was removed briefly, then replaced. The windows were boarded shortly after. That was when it truly ended. Not when the paper was nailed to the door. Not when the chain was locked. But when the windows were covered. Because that meant no one inside needed light. My books remained stacked near my bed. At first, I opened them every morning. I read chapters aloud to myself. I copied sentences into a notebook. But without correction, without discussion, without Miss Adler's steady voice guiding us through history and poetry, the words began to lose structure. Learning had always felt like climbing something. Now it felt like standing still. Winter returned before we realized how much time had passed. Children who once worried about arithmetic now worried about ration cards. Those who struggled with handwriting now practiced silence instead. We grew taller, quieter. One evening, as snow fell heavily against the roof, my mother brought the old oil lamp closer to me. "Read," she said gently. So I did. I read the same poem Miss Adler had taught us last spring. About dawn, about renewal, about how light returns even after the longest night. My voice trembled halfway through, not because I had forgotten the lines, but because I had not forgotten them. Months later, news came that the war was shifting. Lines were moving. Cities were changing hands. Hope reappeared cautiously, like a stray cat testing a doorstep. One morning, almost a year after the chain first appeared, I walked past the building again. The boards were still there, but the chain was gone. The doors were slightly open. Inside, the desks had been pushed aside. Dust coated everything. The blackboard was cracked, yet the room remained. Scarred, changed, but standing. Miss Adler returned 2 weeks later. Thinner, older, but alive. We did not ask where she had been. She did not ask what we had lost. We simply carried desks back into rows. We wiped the chalkboard clean. And on the first morning the school opened again, there were fewer of us. Some families had moved. Some had not survived. Some children had grown too old to return. But the bell rang. It was cracked, unsteady, yet unmistakable. And as I sat once more by the window, coat still on, watching frost form delicate patterns on the glass, I realized something. The morning the school never opened again had not been the end. It had been a pause, a long, frightening, uncertain pause, but not an erasure. Because memory holds what walls cannot. And as long as someone remembers the sound of a teacher's voice, the scrape of chalk, the echo of footsteps in a wooden hallway, a school is never truly closed forever.